Hello, Jean. How lovely to see you, and thank you so much for joining us at the Authority this month. You're, as I've just said, you're the author of one of the newest titles, the Authority Guide to Performance Management, which is published on the 17th of July, and we're very much looking forward to the launch of that. So, Jean, we're going to have a chat about performance management, being as that's the that's the subject of your book. And perhaps you could tell us, I suppose, in a way, what performance management is for those that perhaps are struggling to understand the concept.
Yeah, I mean, performance management is something that any organization would need, and for a variety of reasons. And ironically, this is one of the issues I talk a little about in the book and in my workshops is many companies conduct performance management and have no idea what they want to get out of it. They have no objectives in mind. They do it because others are doing it. But, one major reason would be how would you know how well you're doing as a company if you don't manage performance?
Yeah.
You have to have some index. And then at a lower level in the organization, how well are your individuals doing? And the reason why you want to know that is because if you don't keep track, there are some people who will coast, yeah. And also, you need to motivate the high performers with tracking them and rewarding them. So you need to start putting processes in place. So both individual and organization performance are reasons. There are other reasons too. You might want to focus on development, and that should be a part of a good performance culture. And there are kind of two different types of organizations. There's one that's quite rare that focuses on development is the premier reason for performance management, and most of the others it's about decision making. Deciding bonuses, pay rises, who's going to be promoted, things like that. So there's a number of reasons why, but essentially what you're doing is you're tracking performance and you're giving feedback on that performance. And maybe one little step I missed is, first of all, you have to let people know what they have to do. What are the expectations? And, the savvy person who's listening to this will realize that there's a lot of psychology in what I've just said is you're letting people know what they have to do. You're telling people how well they're doing, and you're acknowledging when they do well or when they don't do well. And those are the three essentials, psychological essentials to any good performance management system. To make sure those things are in there.
Fantastic. So would you say that everybody should be putting together a performance management system? Every business?
Every business, yeah. Now, I'm not saying they need a big bureaucratic process because
Okay.
that's the problem.
Mm.
The reason why we have bureaucratic processes is that the bigger you get in an organization, the harder it is to keep track of things. So you get somebody who likes detail and structure, and they put that into place, and maybe it's over the top. You probably don't need all that structure. You probably need an optimal amount of structure. But if you get rid of it totally, then what happens? Again, here's some psychology: is we go back to being what I call the economic animal. And that means we do the least amount of effort for the most output. So some of the research on companies that are getting rid of performance ratings shows that managers revert back to that natural behavior, which is they spend less time giving feedback. They're more subjective, or they're perceived to be more subjective in how they determine outcomes like bonuses and promotions and so on. So, a startup or a new company or a small company, they're not immune to those issues, those problems. They're going to have, if you don't have performance management, how well do people know how well they're doing? Are they meeting their targets? How does the organization know that those people are actually working in the right direction? One of the interesting findings about some of the newer trends in companies is they're actually going back and they're aligning their strategic objectives with individual objectives. And you might think, well, I don't understand. Wouldn't you do that anyhow? Well, guess what? There are a lot of companies, they have no ideas what their individual objectives were because they lost sight of them. So company, big, small, dynamic, more innovative, creative, or more, structured, or, and not so innovative. Any company, any organization, government, nonprofit, profit, whatever, everybody needs to have a performance management system of some sort. But we're just not saying it has to all be so bureaucratic.
I see. Because something you touched on just there, which I've been aware of, is the fact that this seems to it's interesting talking about this because it seems to have become, and this business of companies throwing away the kind of performance ratings idea. That's been the trend, has it not?
Yeah, well, we could say it's a trend, but I've been doing research in the UK, survey research, and it was based upon asking some similar questions plus new ones on CEB research, and CEB is Corporate Executive Board. I've also doing the same research now in New Zealand, and in the next couple of weeks we're doing it in Slovakia. And basically, what we found so far is anywhere from 3 to 7% of employers are eliminating the ratings. That's not a trend. That's big employers getting this into the business press and saying, "Wow, look at what we're doing," and others thinking, "Oh, I'd love to do that because we hate our ratings so much." But it's not a trend. Yeah.
I see.
The risk is that other companies will follow suit, and they're not prepared because they don't have a performance culture. So everything falls apart. And this research I told you about would show that their managers will stop doing what they're doing now because the structure forces them to do it.
Yes.
So that's really
okay. So performance management is a lot more than just appraisals, isn't it? Can you tell us a bit more about what it involves?
Yeah, well, I mean, in a very broad sense, first of all, it's communication. It's setting expectations, and it's not just setting goals, which would be part of what you would literally call performance management or performance appraisal.
Yes.
But it's about expectations. So to start with, I worked at a Swedish healthcare product company, and I was helping them refresh their performance management system, but also bring in some of these new elements. And I was saying that we should brand the new process, and to build in some excitement. And really what I wanted to get away from was where managers weren't really having much enthusiasm around setting expectations. And this biggest Swedish company, they were very laissez-faire, and they said, "Oh no, that sounds like rah Americanism, boom, boom, boom." And it may have been, but I really felt that that's what managers need to do. They need to shout from the rooftops, "This is my expectation. I want you to excel." But instead we're getting managers going, "Okay, yeah, here's your objectives. Go away and do a good job." So it is about communication, expectation. There are cultures where you say we expect people to exceed targets, we expect people to excel, and there are cultures that say it's okay if you just sort of coast by. Yeah. So communication and setting expectations is a large part of it.
Yeah.
Development is a large part of it. Even though you think, oh, you do development anyhow, but as part of performance management, we develop people to help them improve their performance, but also help them grow as individuals. Because one is, if they're not performing well, that's obviously part of performance management. But by helping people grow, and most people do want to grow, although some people will not voice it that way, you're also going to get them more motivated and engaged, and indirectly or directly, their performance is going to improve. So you could also, talk about talent management being part of performance management, because you're trying to identify your best performers through performance ratings or through the performance management process. So there's lots of things that are actually part of what we call performance management. If you think of it in a broad sense, it shouldn't just be about your annual cycle where, one time of the year you sit down and you set your objectives, another time you review them. It should be about these bigger, broader things that happen every day, in and out. And in fact, some of the new corporate programs around simplification and getting rid of ratings is one of them, for example, Cargill is calling it everyday performance management. And the message to managers is this is something you do every day. It isn't an add-on. So don't think of this as a burden. And I think what they're also saying, and I really encourage this, is you're a people manager. Your job is to manage people. It isn't to continue doing what you did as a professional. So if you're a functional manager, you're an accountant, let's say, and now you're the accountant manager, you need to stop doing all that individual contribution work as an accountant. You contribute when you need to, but you now need to focus more on your people management skills, and your people management tasks. So you see, all these different things really remind us that it's more than just the process that we think it is. It's how we should be living and breathing day in and day out. And a large part of that, hopefully, has become clear, is the manager plays a huge role in communicating these messages in creating inspiring visions for the employees, in providing feedback, in identifying and supporting development, in distinguishing between performance levels. And, a concept I like to use is called manager's catalyst, because the best manager is going to transform their staff into something that might be just okay, into great workers, and also improve their life, because they're going to enjoy their work more and they're going to succeed and grow.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that struck me in your book was that was the importance actually as well of I suppose it's easy to think of performance management as being about the performance of the individual, but actually how that individual fits within the organisation. And what struck me was your talk about vision and your talk about the kind of the core values, in a sense, of the business. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit, because one of the things I think that is really difficult to kind of grasp is how can we create a culture where that vision is shared and those core values, that we're all on the same page, if you like, because that's the tricky thing, isn't it? And if it comes from the top down, how authentic is it, and how does it feel for that individual? How do they know that they are actually performing in the way that's in line with the company values, if you like?
Yeah, I guess I want to talk about that in two ways. One is I want to talk about the role of your executives, and two, I want to talk about the role of the manager. And the reason we want to focus on the manager is I do think they're very central to communicating a lot of the performance culture, but they don't have the power to create that culture. It's your executives.
Yeah.
And I also want to come back to this notion that I often see as manager as victim, saying I can't do X, Y, Z because we don't have the money, or they won't let me do it. And I think even if you're in a culture that isn't a performance culture, any manager still has in their control the ability to communicate the right message, to send the right vision, and so on. But I'll come back to that in just a sec.
Yeah.
So Edgar Schein is an organizational change or organizational development guru. And he's got some really easy to understand models of organizational change and culture. And one thing that he would say is that it is your executives that embed your cultural change, right? So if you want to create a performance culture, it does have to come top down. Now, that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to succeed, but your executives are the people with the status and the power. Yeah. So if you have, all your line managers are trying to implement this great stuff around performance culture, and the executives haven't bought into it, forget it. It's not going to happen unless they all riot and they take over the institution. So your executives have to walk their talk. They have to believe in it. And so that's really important as a starting point. But then your managers, your people managers, they're the ones that implement, not embed. They implement.
Yes.
And that means that they take whatever's been developed, and ideally it's been developed, jointly with managers and staff and so on. They take it and they realize it or operationalize it on a day-to-day basis. So a great example would be, let's say you have an organizational vision, but actually maybe it's not that inspiring. A manager could still take it at their level and make it meaningful for people at that level. So maybe it's a function, maybe it's engineering, and it's a particular division of engineering. So it's not the big picture vision, but what does vision mean for that particular group? Yeah? In the same way that they could take the values and make them come alive. Yeah? And part of the processes of the structure, without over bureaucratizing it, of a performance management process is you build the values in there, and then the managers have something to use, some structure to make sure they enhance or encourage these values. So that was me coming back to this notion of manager as victim, I guess, is, any manager can take a bit of control and say, look, I'm not finding this vision very inspiring, but I want to tell you this is what it means to me.
Yes.
And this is what I think it should mean to you. And Simon Sinek is a great TED Talk type person, and he's got this, getting to why. And It's a notion of how do you inspire people, and it's not about what they do or how they do it. It's about why they do it. So there are different ways in which managers, and this is in a chapter on inspiration, values, and vision, is what managers can do to communicate at their own level, whichever level it is, why they're there and why their team is there. Yeah. And yeah, so I think for me, that's how you start creating a culture, is both from the executives walking their talk and then any manager at any level implementing and helping realize it. And of course, if you don't get the support of managers, that's, in the same way if executives don't embed and if managers don't operationalize it, they don't help realize it, then you could also not get anywhere.
Yes,
so
yes.
it has to be ideally it's collaborative in how you create. But practically too, you can't get everybody involved. You can't, if you're new to an organization, I guess you missed the boat. But certainly, you should try to collaborate and listen to different voices as much as possible in determining what performance culture will look like.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Jean. That's really interesting. So I know that this is a question that kind of interests you particularly, and I wonder if perhaps we might explore it a little bit, which is kind of, which is actually what would the structure look like? How much do we need to? You talk about it not being too bureaucratic, but actually, and that's what, in a way, it seems that businesses have been reacting against to an extent. How can we get that level of structure, right for our business, really?
Yeah, and I guess it's not black and white. It's gray. Depends on your context. So, and one of just as one example, should you get rid of ratings? That's going to be a matter of structure. And if you're in a finance organization and you have very concrete targets that are objective and nobody would disagree what the targets are, right? Then it's probably okay to continue with ratings, right? But that's a very rare setting. In most settings, your targets, your objectives are quite ambiguous or subjective. What's a good manager? What's the criterion for a good manager? So that was just one example, but I guess really what I was getting at was, it's going to depend on your situation, and I don't myself don't still know what that optimal structure would look like. But I think what it would be, and the reason why I'm saying that is, if we get too concerned with, well, should it be a 5-point rating scale or a 7-point rating scale? Should we have documentation? Should we use this type of format? That's what I call sweating the small stuff. Yeah. And it's tinkering with process mechanics. And years of research, probably over 50 years of research in the psychology field shows that tinkering with the process stuff doesn't make any difference. We spent years on different rating formats as an example, and it doesn't add any value. Right, we're still limited. Human beings are still limited information processors that make mistakes because we're biased and we don't notice everything. Yeah. So what I would say is, think about what you're trying to do, and think about what minimal structure will work, and keep it simple, silly, right? Yeah. So an example would be, how much documentation do you need? Do you really need a lot of documentation? Yeah. So maybe you might say, okay, I think we need enough to know what the objectives are, and we need enough space on the form to say where they're reached. And if we going to have a rating, then you allow the rating thing there. But keep it simple. How many times should we meet? Well, what are you trying to achieve? A lot of the trends they're adding what they call check-ins, and some of them are quarterly. Gap, for example, does them monthly. Now, the risk there is that becomes just another process change, right? But really what you want real-time feedback, and that should occur anywhere. So, if you ask me, okay, optimal structure, probably the firms that are going to get it right is that they're encouraging their managers to give that feedback in the moment when it's necessary. And if they're going to do any check-ins, it might be twice a year. Okay. And that's only to create a summary of how it's gone, not because it's feedback. It's not new feedback. Yeah. So I think some of the firms that look like they're doing great stuff, if they're only building in check-ins, they probably haven't got the culture right, because it's not encouraging real-time feedback.
That's really
So
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, these are just little examples of the types of structure you could put in there. I mean, in my book, I think I probably list about 10 different aspects of structure that you could
Yes.
consider. Do you have ratings? Do you have documentation? How often do you meet? And so on and so on. And I would say consider them, but don't belabor them. And just think about the real intent. And in the end, ideally, you come away with a light process that is more meaningful around performance discussions. And you come back to three essentials of psychology, which is, does this process give you the opportunity to set expectations and set goals? Does it give you the opportunity to give feedback all the time that's meaningful? And are you able to acknowledge and reinforce performance differences? Those are the three important things. And as long as you can do them, you might want to have ratings, you might not. You might want to have a little more structure, but just as much as you need. So that and it's a bit skeptical. People sort of slap me on the wrist for this, but we are economic animals. You need to give some structure and some force for managers to follow through.
Yes.
And just an option though. Yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant. So this is all work. This is what you do. Partly what you do, isn't it, Jean? Tell us a little bit about how you help businesses with this.
Yeah. So I mean, the example where I was earlier, the Swedish healthcare company is they simply wanted to just add a disciplinary procedure. Hadn't had it, and sort of make sure it was up to date and so on. And what I was able to do at the time is suggest putting in real-time feedback. Yeah, because it was a new concept and it would help bring about cultural change. Interestingly, at the same time, I would introduce growth mindset concepts. If you're familiar with growth mindset versus fixed mindset, and I didn't win that battle.
Oh, okay.
In another company a project I'm working on now, it's a property management company in London. And they're actually a small company, under 200 people, so they've not got a formal performance management system. But their valuation as a company, because their parent company is quite well known, is something like £11 billion or $11 billion. One of those, it's still a lot of money.
Yeah.
And the remit is to build a performance management system and keep it simple. But what we're helping them do is consider how do you create a meaningful culture around that new performance management system, so it doesn't just become a process that you have to do. So one thing we've talked about is how do we incorporate the values to make sure that they come alive as part of that process, and do they want a performance rating, or not? Now this is it's a not financial services, but it's got some pretty concrete performance objectives. So maybe it won't be a problem. So we're going to help them work through some of these issues, and ideally they come out with a process that's more formalized, but it's not bureaucratic, and it helps create and engender a performance culture where people want to give feedback and they feel like they can succeed because they're getting all the right inducements to perform.
Fantastic. Well, that's great. Jean, thank you so much. This has been a really, really interesting chat. And I guess what we'll do is we'll provide your website details, but at the end, so people can find out more from you. And of course, the book is available, or will be available, from the 17th of July. On Amazon or on our website, and those details will be on the slide at the end of this as well. So, Jean, thank you so much. Really, really interesting to talk to you, and wish you well with everything that you're doing next. And I know you're travelling about the world a lot, so come and see us in Bristol when you're over here. And thank you very much for today.
Thank you. Thanks, Sue.